Joining us from our South Florida newsroom, the aforementioned Republican Javier Manjarres, managing editor of the Shark Tank political blog. Also joining us from the other side of the aisle, Skyping in from Washington, D.C., Ari Rabin-Havt, host of The Agenda on Sirius XM Radio, former advisor to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. Gents, to you both, thanks very much. Ari, to you first. Make the case for a tax increase.
Here we go.
Sure. I think well, first off, it's not a tax increase for everybody. Middle class would see tax cuts. And I think what people should look at is the Kansas-California comparison over the past 4 years. Kansas, where Sam Brownback was governor, had a huge round of tax cuts. For the wealthiest, the biggest tax cuts, and actually for some of the lower taxpayers actually saw an increase in their tax bill even though the marginal rates were cut. That was Kansas. California saw an enormous 30% tax increase on its wealthiest citizens. What happened? California's job base grew by 3.4 times what Kansas's did. Their incomes went up 13% more than Kansas's incomes went up. And their borrowing costs dropped while Kansas's borrowing costs increased. And wait for this, public employment in California, meaning government employment, went down and Kansas's went up. There's the case for these tax cuts.
Well, Ari, do you buy the California-Kansas comparison, Javier, that Ari just gave us?
Look, Ari and the rest of the Democrats can spin it however they want, but at the end of the day, the fact they can spin but say what you want. At the end of the day, higher taxes. When you tax the wealthiest of Americans, it's going to trickle down and tax the middle class. But then again, where does President Obama draw that line between middle class and wealthy? I mean, I'm sure that bar is pretty low.
Ari, the speculation is that this is not really an honest attempt to govern, but instead to just point out political differences, that redistribution of wealth and tax breaks for the rich remain so much of the anti-GOP mantra from you guys on the left. The president's really not interested in finding middle ground and working on something that everybody could agree on, for example, like tax reform.
Well, actually,
go ahead.
I think that begins this conversation, JD. This is a legitimate difference of opinion between conservatives and liberals, between Democrats and Republicans. We should have this legitimate debate, and I think Democrats should present their plan for what tax reform looks like. Republicans should present their plan, and we should work it out. Look, I think the president, one of his major points is raising the capital gains tax, the top rate for capital gains tax, 28% for top earners. I think that's a reasonable conversation to have, because what that's saying, right now our tax system says that unearned income we value higher than earned income, that Paris Hilton's inheritance is worth more than the lawyer who goes to work every day.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned inheritance, because, Javier, it's bringing back what we thought we had put to death, the death tax, part of this tax increase. Is that a wise idea?
Well, no, and first of all, let's take Paris Hilton out of the equation here. But I agree. Look, there needs to be tax reform, but the president's form of tax reform is taxing. And it's been proven that cutting taxes to all Americans, including the wealthy, benefits the economy. And that's just simple fact. And Ari can spin it however he wants. But look, death tax is coming back. We knew it was coming. You knew this was part of President Obama's agenda to hurt the American economic prosperity, and this is just part of his game plan moving into the last 2 years of his failed presidency.
Ari, very quickly, go ahead, 15 seconds.
No, I mean, if it's helped so much, why is the state of Kansas going bankrupt? You got your conservative fantasy land in Kansas. Sam Brownback got to do whatever he wants, and the state is going bankrupt because of it.
Interesting. I would just point out that California ain't Kansas, and neither is Kansas the land of Oz. But we're going to have both of you gentlemen back to discuss other issues. Stay with us. More on the panel on America's Forum. Let's continue now on America's Forum, bringing back our political panel. Rejoining us from our South Florida Newsmax newsroom, Javier Manjarres, managing editor of the Shark Tank political blog, and Skyping in from Washington, D.C., Ari Rabin-Havt, host of The Agenda on Sirius XM Radio and a former advisor to Senate Majority, or now Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid. To you both, thanks for hanging in. Javier, according to an ABC News Washington Post poll, Americans are worried about another terror attack on our soil. You heard Leon Panetta. Are Americans right to be worried?
Oh, absolutely. Look, we saw this a couple of years back with the Boston bombing. We saw what's happening across the border in Canada, and now the foiled plot, the 2012 foiled plot to bomb the U.S. Capitol. The FBI just released a video of their sting operation. Look, all it takes is one of them to be right once and cause fear and hurt the economy here in the U.S. I mean, I'm afraid for it as well, because look, how many sympathizers, radical Islamic sympathizers are here in the United States? A lot of them. Look, 100 of them went over to fight in Iraq. Go figure.
And while hundreds may be leaving to go fight in Iraq, Ari, obviously, the president is our commander-in-chief. When he talked about what happened in Paris the other week, he said it was terrorism, but he stopped short of calling it Islamist. Should the president broaden his lexicon somewhat?
Look, I think if you're talking about specific acts of terror, you can define it. I think Paris was clearly an act of Islamic terrorism. I think we've dealt with terrorism in this country in a significant way for about, let's say, 30 years. Let's start with Pan Am Flight 103. We can go to Oklahoma City, the Atlanta Olympics, of course, 9/11, the envelopes that went to the Capitol building in the aftermath that contained anthrax, and the shoe bomber, the underwear bomber. The first World Trade Center bombing. We can go through terrorist attacks on this country for 30 years. Thankfully, a bunch have been foiled, and sadly a few have cost lives, and sadly one cost 3,000 lives. Tragically, I think terrorism is something we should worry about, and it's a reality in the world today.
And mindful of terrorism, so what you're telling us is the president should be describing Islamic terrorism when it is perpetrated by Islamist terrorists. He should not be afraid of adding that to the lexicon.
Right. If a terrorist act, well, I would say it's more, what is the motivation for that attack? If in the case of the Paris attack, let's just use that because that's the most recent example, there clearly was a religious motivation for the attack, so you shouldn't be scared of saying it. Just like, you shouldn't be scared of talking about the 1996 Atlanta bombing as a Christian terrorist attack. Now, we deal with the problem of Islamic terrorism as a very real problem in the world today and should be dealt with.
Well, Christian terror attack? It was the act of a single person who was a fanatic.
Bomber.
He happened to be Christian.
Who was motivated by his fundamental Christian beliefs. So,
okay, Javier, you in agreement with Ari?
I am just in awe. Listen, I'm in agreement with Ari about the president and calling out Islamist extremism for what it is. But for the bomber in Atlanta, look, I mean, I don't get it.
Aren't Christian terrorists? Okay, fine.
There's a lot of extremism in the world. There's all extreme being spewed out of your mouth. But look, if again, to blame this guy, blame the bombing in Atlanta on Christianity, come on. The guy was.
You want to revise? You got 15 seconds, Ari. You want to revise and extend your remarks? 15 seconds.
No, the Atlanta Olympic bomber was motivated. He was somebody who was motivated by Christian beliefs. This isn't an indictment on all Christianity. It's an indictment on that man and skewed in false beliefs, just like Islamic terrorism was based on skewed and false beliefs.
Well, we appreciate the freewheeling discussion. I think we're going to have to continue this at some point. America's Forum will be right back.